okay, this thing about humility and stuff, I'm skeptical about it in a lot of ways. There's being humble, and then there's
Being
modest
weak
and things.
or being modest or
Yeah. I, I really find that egos for executives are um, are present nearly everywhere except a few. And the way the way you can really see if they're sincere is not how they talk to you as a professor or as a media trainer, but how they talk to support staff, the person that greets the person at the reception, how they order another glass of water. Um, and so I have found that if I could wish something, is that I would like to see more executives who are genuinely humble, and because I think they make better leaders because they know what it's like to be powerless. And
hmm
the more arrogant and the more commanding they are about ordering people around, um, I think it's just bad mojo. But too often that's who we get. Um, uh, so but basically, I, if I'm coaching somebody, I want them to be them. But there may be times when I want them to be a little bit less certain parts of them. Um, and that's that arrogance, humility thing. Um,
hmm
so I don't know
Okay.
if that answers your question, though.
It's in a roundabout way. I think it actually does. Uh, I'm gonna move on and call you out for being the Dale Carnegie of Japan. I'm kidding, but one of the courses, one of the courses you've taught has been around negotiation and building relationships. How to win friends and influence people in Japan. Just kidding. That is something that we actually have spent quite a bit of time covering on the podcast, but we've primarily been focusing those conversations on China. Do you have some tips that you're willing to share on conducting negotiations in Japan with Japanese counterparts? And I'm going to follow that up with asking if they're vastly different from that in the USA or in Canada or the West. What are some of the best practices you can share? So, again, tips on conducting negotiations in Japan with Japanese counterparts, and then how is that whole experience different over there?
Okay. Well, this is probably where some of my friends will get angry.
All right,
But
I'll
I
invite
mean,
them to the
it's
show.
yeah. But the thing is, I really, having looked at very strong academic negotiations courses, game theory, and things like
Mm-hmm.
that, uh, it doesn't work in Japan. What works in Japan is relationships and taking the time to build the relationship. And if you don't have the relationship, it's going to be a long, frustrating haul. Um, so I find that yes, I think the mistake is to try to negotiate with Japanese like you're Japanese. You're not Japanese, and in fact, that you should play that card often. Um, but at the same time, you should understand where they're coming from. They often, the person you're often talking to is not the decision maker, and so you're going to go through a series of rounds, and in the end, you may not even know who was the decision maker. And often it's a panel of 4 or 5 who made that decision. Um, so understand that. And I so I tell them, build the relationship however you can, even if it's the first time you meet them. I always say smile, make eye contact, and ask them how they are. I mean, just I'm going to be their friend. Now, if they don't want to be my friend, that's cool. Life goes on. But I really feel like when I walk out the door in Tokyo, the you can get so much more by just smile, eye contact, and smile. That's it. And people will talk to you. They'll speak to you in Japanese. They'll speak to you in English. They'll speak to you in German, Spanish, whatever they think you're doing here. That's great. And the same thing works in a boardroom. Just be happy to be there. Just be happy to talk to them. And it really changes the atmosphere of the room. And if you can say something that's slightly funny, self deprecating, that changes it too. It relaxes everybody. But recognize that time is relative. And you got deadlines, they got deadlines, but you know what? You don't know when it's going to end. And so I think just set that aside. You can keep track of the time, but people have just a different clock here. And so be friendly, build a relationship, and then recognize that time, as soon as you start worrying about a deadline, they got you because they can go slower than anybody else. They will just drag you down. So relax, have fun, just be happy to be there. And I think it works personally. Yeah. And if they ask you to give you and other thing is, if they ask you to give a number or quote a number, try to get them to give you the number because they've already got a number in their head. And if you come in too high, way too high, they'll think that you're being sneaky and trying to get something for free. If you come in too low, they'll wonder what the problem is with you or something like that. So I prefer to let, and I've actually heard finance guys from the West talking about it, reverse negotiations. Let them tell me what the number they want, and then they argue about maybe knocking a little bit off. Sounds crazy, I know, but we're interested in a relationship. If we're buying a used car, okay, forget it. But if we're trying to do business, Tokyo's arguably one of the largest cities in the world, and it's a small world that you're moving in. You really is small. So you got to be a good citizen in your little village. Okay, I can't hear you. No.
There we go.
Oh, okay.
Let me put a. I'm gonna put a marker on that part. I'm gonna have to remember that. Sorry, I had muted it. Are there ceremonial aspects to the art of negotiation and even communication in Japan? Like, and I ask this knowing how things often went in China, where food, round table, baijiu, cigarettes, drinking, laughing, getting drunk, all kinds of things. And if you're the lower of the two, then you wait and you be friendly and you open up and you be yourself and you wait to be invited to discuss the thing that everybody and the big elephant in the room. You wait. They will open the door if and when you're ready and you deserve it, because everybody knows what's going on here. You don't need to bring it up. It doesn't need to be plastered on the wall. And when the time is right and when they're ready, they will invite you to that conversation, and then you may walk in.
That's pretty similar to formal negotiations that I would say, over dinner, the discussion. Um, that's why I say don't be in a hurry. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I've gone into a discussion where I just walked in and said this, and the person said not so fast,
Mm-hmm.
and he went to talk about everything else, and I realized that I'd been really really rude. I don't care who you are or whatever, and so now it's like I act like it's the last thing I got all the time in the world. I got all the time in the world, and you just got to be happy to be there, and that works. And so yeah, I think that there is a lot of that formal um,
Yeah.
stuff, and people call it kabuki. It has no meaning. It's just waste of time. You know, mellow out. You're in
Yeah.
Japan. Have a good time.
And I find that it might be somewhat disrespectful. Okay, so you don't care about me. You don't want to get to know me. You're going to show me no respect. You're going to come with some number or something. I like. and versus the opposite of, man, like this has been awesome. I could talk to you all day, but you know what? I'm looking at the time, and if we are going to talk a little bit of business, we probably should get to it because otherwise we're going to be here all day and all night just chatting about this, that, and the other. So, and maybe then is the only time to really, that's how you eventually get there. And it's not something
Yeah,
that you wanted to do, but it's something you probably, we should probably do this.
but the cool thing is, if you get good at it, you don't even have to do that. When there's a
You
lull,
segue. Yeah.
when there's, it's not even a segue. It's like when there's a lull in the conversation, you might go, just, or you might say, excuse me, but ちょっと, you haven't said anything except a little, you know,
Little sound,
or
little,
yeah, a little sound. Touch your
little
watch.
something.
Look at the watch on the clock on the wall. Anything that gives an indication, and they'll move it along. If they don't want to talk, then okay, then say, okay, I'm sorry, I got to go. Um,
Mm,
but that's kind of the fun part. It's just waiting for that moment where you can just kind of ding them.
okay. Now, potentially part of what you just educated us on might be something that you might bring to the work that you do and some of your current consulting work, which is developing C-suite talent. I'd like you to ask you to share a little bit about what that looks like from your side, uh, as in where did the need for this come from? What does that look like in Japan? How is their demand for this? And what are you doing and bringing to your customers when you execute on that business?
Okay, well, first, there's some things that the people need to be able to do to get to that position. One is deliver a presentation well, and I think that's really important. And the other is to be able to talk about their job or their company well, which is media training, right? So it's not that different one on one, but a lot of people when they become executives, they're good at managing, which is deadlines and projects, and they may have learned a certain ruthlessness and a certain and also a lot of them have a strong engineering background, which is plug in the formula and drive it for all it's worth. And that you do need that, that's the gearing in the business. But as you move up the food chain, you find that a lot of times you're trying to, as well as Andy Grove said, is develop people that can replace you. And a lot of executives, simply speaking, lack self-awareness,
Mm,
and it's probably the most difficult thing to do. I mean, I thought I had great self-awareness, but of course, everybody who's in a position as a boss thinks that they have great self-awareness. And then you look back and you're like, I just crushed that person, and I had no idea that I did it. Or I just scared that person and I had no idea that I did it. And so, because you have power, you're viewed for what I call the prism of power. Everything is extreme. If you smile, that makes everybody's day. If you frown, that makes everybody afraid or whatever. And so you've got to kind of learn how to deal with people and manage people in a human way. And that actually helps them to become better, more productive, uh, more thoughtful. If they're afraid, you're not getting a lot of production out of them. And so one of the things about becoming, let's say, moving from, let's say, middle management or young executive to senior executive is this thing about becoming better about managing yourself and people. And there's a lot of different ways of doing that. Um, and So usually what you're finding is you're trying to get people to go from, let's say, the structured engineering approach to more like, and I've seen some real masters at IBM. That's where I was so amazed was people that would walk in, they're on deadline pressure, and they know they have a huge video conference coming up with 3,000 people somewhere in some huge stadium somewhere in Latin America. They walk in and they say hello to everybody, talk to them, ask them how they're doing. Just perfect calm, sit down, and without anything, let's cue it up and go. And bang, they hit it. And I thought, that's the kind of person I want to be. And I think that that's the kind of person you need to develop. Somebody who's caring and not crushing people. No, oh, well, you got to hit the numbers. But the numbers are actually something that virtually anybody can think about and anybody can hit.
Mm-hmm.
It's so when I talk, let me just summarize this. So when I talk about developing executives and their talent, I'm also what that gets the company is not only an executive, but it gets an executive that nurtures the talent below them. So it's a whole ecosystem. It's like if I can get you to be a better person, a better manager of people, then I can get all these other people that work with you to become better, happier, and develop and job. That's I think the real goal in the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't remember where I heard it. And Dad, if you're listening and it was you, I'm sorry I didn't remember it was you. But I've always felt that I had this advice that when you move from senior manager to director or some kind of jump like that, there's as you transition and cross into that, there's something that you want to keep. Um, there's something that you're going to lose and you should get rid of. There's something that you're going to need to learn and to gain, and then there's going to be something that you have that you're going to want to double down on in the next role. And I've also heard this kind of along the KISS principles of keep, improve, stop, and start. Certain things, and it's behooves one to go through that process of a little self reflection as they move to start to understand and maybe self identify some of those things. Keep what got you there, improve the things that you're going to need going forward, stop doing those things because it's not necessary, and start doing these things because they will be. um, Now, do you think that this applies broadly, globally, or are there nuances to that and what you were talking about that are specific to Japan?
Well, I do think it applies globally, and in fact, that's our approach. Is that um, the two professors I'm also working with this on are out of Spain, but they operate globally with clients in the Middle East and Eastern and Western Europe, and some in North America and some in Asia. So it is quite global. Um, one of the things that you want to also appreciate about moving up to that executive level is that a lot of times people are under tremendous pressure. And so this thing about being nice to people or not being nice, but being human with them, caring about them becomes more difficult because you've got an enormous amount of work to do, an enormous amount of pressure to deliver. And so from their point of view, they're in the crucible and that you want me to be nice and ask this guy how his dog is or whatever. It, hey, wait a minute. It's like, but the better you are about being human to somebody, the better you are about handling your own emotions and your own pressures. I think that's part of it. So I see a lot of managers. I've seen a lot of managers who just turned into tyrants. It's so easy to do,
I have seen the same.
right? And others who have turned into cowards. And
Hmm. I've
That's,
also seen some that blossomed. I'm like, wow, you were good at that role, but you are great in
yeah,
this role.
yeah,
But it's harder to see because they don't often get that opportunity because unless they were great at the last role, they don't think that they can be good at the next. When
right.
sometimes maybe the operator is actually better as the manager.
Hmm. Well, actually, I think that that is true. That sometimes, and is you promote a great engineer or great process persons into a position where they have to become much more of a person,
Mm,
personable person, and it becomes difficult. I would argue that Mr. Gerstner, when he first came to IBM, was much more of a he was strong financial accounting background, extremely bright in that respect. But it's like, how do you get this person to become a leader, to engage people? And 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 he did it. He was funny,
mm-hmm.
brilliant, and so I think you can blossom into that, but it takes some work, and you've got to be aware that you're going to have to do that. But there are people who I think are, as you say, they're better at the higher position than they were at the process position or the middle manager position.
Yeah. Let me do a final fun little game here. Let me throw some names at you of famous leaders. Let me know how they're received, and everybody who in the West is listening can guess to how they're perceived there. But you know, let me like Elon Musk. How is he perceived in Japan?
I knew you were going to ask that. Um, you know, I think that there's a lot of people that are on both sides. I mean, he's as controversial, or the opinions as divided in Japan as it is elsewhere.
Okay.
Uh, my opinion is that he's jumped the shark, and and also he's unstable. He's
Yeah.
gotten to a point where and this is what you really hate. He's in an echo chamber where whatever he says or has been saying is admired and applauded. Nothing fails like success, and he's been enormously successful.
Yeah.
But it happens.
Okay. I agree. I hope for the best. He's really done some amazing things, but I'm worried for him. Zuckerberg.
Zuck, when the movie The Social Network came out in Japan, that actually is what blew up Facebook in Japan. Until then, nobody was using it.
Mm,
And then here, all these morning news shows were showing you what Facebook is about, and this is how you use it, and this is a housewife, and she thinks it's really fun. Um, Zuck was considered cool during that period, but I don't see a lot of people talking about him. In fact, when I say Zuck, people don't know who that is. So
yeah.
he's
What
kind of
about
off the screen.
Bezos?
Bezos. Um, Bezos has, I would say, almost no recognition in Japan. I mean, among business people, maybe, but there isn't really a lot of traction there. That's what I've
Okay.
seen.
Last one.
I can give
Jobs.
you some that are more popular and more interesting in Japan.
I'm gonna ask you that. Just I want your take on Steve Jobs. What do you
The
think the
God,
sentiment on him?
the
Yeah.
Buddha. um, you know, I teach some really young people now, um, 18 to 20 years old. And so when I talk about Steve Jobs, they kind of remember him as the iPhone guy or know of him as the iPhone guy. And I show that wonderful speech sometimes that he did at Stanford in whatever
Right.
2003.
Commencement
I said, you got to
speech. Yeah.
remember that the biggest internet technology then was the iPod. And like, what was that? Okay. And but he's got such a perfect classic Joseph Campbell hero story. Um, yeah, he's still something here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mythical. Um, okay. Some
mythical.
of the leaders that you think are quite well revered in Japan.
here in Japan. Um,
Well, the ones that you kind of thought, you said I could give you some names
no,
of.
yeah, well, I'm going to.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Who are they?
a really one that I think tends to be. Oh, I just forgot his name. Is Virgin.
Oh, right.
Richard Branson.
Richard
Branson.
Branson. Yeah.
Branson has mojo in Japan because he's done. He's cool. He's just this long-haired dude, and he's done some consumer events here that were pretty cool. Uh, and so even though he's quite old and almost off the radar screen, he's considered pretty cool. There was, I would say, one of the really interesting, I mean, Toyota is fairly run of the mill. Akio Toyota, as far as the people in business, I think that they know and respect him. Um, I would
Hmm.
say
Any
Mikitani to some
women?
extent.
Any women doing things really well? We always need to add them and get them more involved in the conversations here.
There are some women that are doing some really cool things. Let me let me check her name here. Um, and she's doing this social media thing, and it rocks.
Hmm.
Um, I was a fan of hers before. I do presentations for her every now and then for her group. The group is called Holland Village. Okay, and it's basically a social group for primarily, I guess you would say, young professional women who are interested in finance and financial. And the way it started was she was posting up these little brief advice posts on Instagram, and that built out, right? And then from there, um, she started. She created a website with all these self-help videos, how to eat or how to cook or yoga. And so, you know, I did one on problem solving for kind of a mini MBA. There's all sorts of people showing how to learn a language. Um, but she's done really well with this. And it's basically a social network. Yeah. And
Hmm.
people, it's a club. People pay about 10,000 yen a month to be members. And because it's so popular now, she has to do a lottery for people to come to a dinner, right? At the American Club or wherever it is. And I think she's going to start a restaurant. Um, what is her name? She's so incredibly smart. Murakami Makiko. Murakami Makiko. I think she
That's
is really one of the most innovative entrepreneurs that I know of because this thing just started as a little advice column on Instagram, and now it's blown up into more than 10,000 members. Um, Huge amount of excitement and engagement in this club, in this
yeah.
social club.
Amazing. Okay. Well, thanks for grabbing a couple of names for us. I appreciate that. And I'm going to ask you for a couple of more because this is what we always do. I mean, we get great guests, and great guests hang out with other great people who would make great guests. And if you say their name on the show, then we get to throw you under the bus by going and saying, "Hey, Gil threw your name out as a great guest. Now you pretty much have to reply to me on LinkedIn or email or whatever to come on the show." And, by the way, go listen to his podcast and share it with your friends. So, do you have a couple of people that you think, and I mean, maybe not like right in line with your industry, right? Because you've covered off some topics in your geography and knowledge area, right? But some people that, again, and who our audience is and who we're trying to drop knowledge to. So, any couple of people that you might recommend that, people should pay attention to?
Well, first it's like when I connected with your man Eddie, I told him I said just go through my LinkedIn there and
Hmm.
contact anybody you want. There's a lot of folks in there, several thousand. But one that I was just talking to this morning was John Flanagan. He's the head of the History Channel and A&E Japan,
Oh, cool.
and he's done some really cool things with that.
Oh, I like
And
that. That would be
yeah,
unique. That would be different. That would be fun.
Johnny's cool. Johnny's very cool, and
Has
he's
to be.
very popular. He's very well known. People love him. He speaks Japanese like a native,
Oh,
and he just knows a lot about, I think, the visual media especially, and
very
and
nice.
very
Oh, we
cool
will
cat.
definitely try to get in touch with him.
Yeah, sure. Talk to him.
Yeah.
The other one that I really like talking to is David Hackett. Hackett has, again, like, speaks Japanese like a native speaker, but he worked for many years at Mizuno in the 80s on events marketing and sports events, and then he moved to Hakuhodo for many years. Um, so he's worked practically every major sporting event, well, many times over,
Yeah.
and now he's moved into some investing in some new sports digital companies. And so it's a very cool space that he's in right now. But the man knows everything about sports sponsorship and marketing in Japan perfectly. Um,
Okay.
and great guy.
Now, can you? I think you said what I know in English, and I'm probably saying it wrong. Was it Mizuno?
Mizuno.
Yeah, Mizuno. That's how you actually. That's like the technical proper pronunciation, isn't it?
Right, because but it's been called Mizuno so much in English that they actually, in some of the ads, I haven't seen their ads on TV much anymore, but they dropped the U and start calling it Mizno, which sounds even worse. But that's kind of like Mazda, right?
Uh huh.
Mazda is
Oh,
actually Matsuda, right?
really?
Matsuda.
Oh my gosh.
And
What
that
the hell,
they
Matsuda?
felt was too, yeah, I mean, the first time I did media training for Matsuda, I was like, Matsuda, what kind of company is that? And they said, well, it's one of the largest car manufacturers in the country, in the world. I've never heard of it. And then I realized they were talking about Mazda. Yeah, so Mazda put a Z there to get rid of the S, and Mizno is now Mizno, which sounds terrible. It's Mizuno, Waterfield. Um,
Oh, okay. Waterfield. Man,
yeah,
I'm
but
gonna
I
have to
think it's
look
a
up more
beautiful
information.
name. I think Mizuno is a very nice name. Just have to work on not making that U such a long, strong sound.
Okay.
That's all.
Well, if I'm ever on like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and that's the the $1 million question, I'm gonna blow
Okay.
people's minds by knowing that.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
Mhm.
Listen, how can people potentially reach out, get in touch with you, or find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way to find me. I'm working on my website that'll go with my book that I'm going to finish. Well, it is finished. It just needs to be formatted and everything else. The book is on critical analysis for business. Um,
Oh,
so those will be coming up soon. But just find me on LinkedIn. I'm the guy with, I don't know, 3,000 friends.
followers, friends, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. And you know what? Let us know when the book comes out. We'll have to maybe revisit having you to come back on and talk a little bit about that. I think that would be fun.
Oh
Especially
yes.
if you're covering that area of the world.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for your interest, Todd, in what I'm doing here, and I really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you again or meeting you in
Yeah.
person sometime.
Gil, it
Okay.
is our pleasure. It is our honor. We're gonna drop two parts of this episode. It's guests like you and the knowledge and expertise that you have that makes this podcast go round. So don't thank me. I thank you, and the audience thanks you, and Eddie thanks you, and everybody at WPIC thanks you. Thank you very,
Yeah,
very much for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
it was my pleasure.
Okay.
Thank
For
you.
all of you listening to us on the audio only version, don't forget that we have the YouTube channel, so you can go over and check it out on that. And if you are watching the video, but you need your hands and your eyes for other things, don't forget we have the audio only version over on all the podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and the rest. So for now, from me and for Gil and from Eddie and WPIC, thanks everybody for joining and tuning in today. And we will see you next time.
Thank you. Bye bye.